Hey folks, I know I am just an old guy telling stories, but please leave a like and subscribe before we start. Let's enjoy in today's stories. Before I dive into today's stories, I want to say, disclaimer. The content presented in the video is purely for entertainment purposes only. The theories and stories discussed in this video are speculative and are not supported by any evidence or proof. Viewer discretion is advised. I don't even know where to begin. It's not like I'm some tech genius or a dark web junkie. I'm just a guy who sometimes gets a little too curious for his own good. This all started a few weeks ago when I stumbled upon a random YouTube video titled, "The Dark Web, Things You're Not Supposed to Know." It was one of those late-night rabbit holes where one video leads to another, and before you know it, the sun's rising, and you've learned nothing useful. But something about that video stuck with me. It wasn't overly dramatic or filled with ominous music. It felt real, like the guy was telling the truth. He mentioned a forum on the dark web where people posted leaked documents, classified information, and other forbidden content. I don't even know why I decided to check it out. I guess I wanted to see if it was real. You hear so much about the dark web, and most of it sounds like urban legends. Hitmen, human experiments, all that nonsense. I wanted to see for myself. So I downloaded Tor browser, switched my search engine to DuckDuckGo, and after a bit of digging, I found myself on a forum that looked like it hadn't been updated since 2005. You know the type, just plain black and white text, no flashy graphics, no ads, no user-friendly layout. It was called Echelon. I don't know if that's supposed to mean something, but it felt fitting. The posts were all over the place. Some were your typical conspiracy theories about the moon landing or aliens at Area 51. Others were more disturbing. Leaked military documents, photos of surveillance setups, and even a few posts claiming to have insider knowledge of secret government operations. Most of it seemed fake, like the kind of stuff you'd find on Reddit's conspiracy threads. But then I saw a post that caught my eye, how Pokémon GO became the CIA's most successful project. Now, I'm not even a Pokémon GO player. I downloaded it when it first came out, like everyone else, but I lost interest pretty quickly. Still, something about that title was just weird. I clicked on it, expecting some half-baked conspiracy theory about Pikachu being a spy or something. What I found was a detailed post with links to what the author claimed were leaked internal documents from the CIA. At first, I thought it was a joke, but as I started reading, it didn't feel like one. The post started with a brief overview of how Pokémon GO exploded in popularity when it was launched in 2016. Everyone knows the story. People walking around everywhere, glued to their phones, chasing virtual creatures in parks, malls, and even random alleys. But then the post took a turn. It claimed that the game wasn't just a cultural phenomenon. It was a tool designed by the CIA to collect massive amounts of data without anyone even realizing it. The theory went something like this. Google Maps, as powerful as it is, costs billions of dollars to maintain. They have fleets of cars driving around with 360-degree cameras, capturing every street and building. But what if there was a way to get that same data and even better live footage without spending a dime? That's where Pokémon GO came in. By creating an addictive game that required players to move around and use their phone cameras, the CIA could essentially crowdsource live GPS and video data from millions of people worldwide. And the craziest part? People paid them to do it through in-game purchases. The post included screenshots of what looked like internal memos, discussing how certain rare Pokémon were strategically placed in locations of interest. Need live footage from a specific alley in Tokyo? Put a Charizard there. Want to map out the layout of a military base? Drop a rare spawn in the area and watch the players flock to it. The post even claimed that some Pokestops and gyms were placed in specific locations to gather data on high-traffic areas or secure zones. At first, I thought it was too ridiculous to be true. But then I started remembering some of the weird news stories from when the game first came out. Like that one about players wandering into restricted areas, or how businesses were paying to have Pokestops placed near their locations to drive traffic. It suddenly didn't seem so far-fetched. The more I read, the more I started to believe it. The post included links to .pdf files that supposedly contained the leaked documents. I clicked on one, and it opened a scanned document with what looked like a government letterhead. It talked about Project Aegis, which was described as a data aggregation initiative designed to enhance global surveillance capabilities through user-generated content. The language was dry and technical, but the implications were clear. If this was real, Pokémon GO wasn't just a game. It was a global surveillance tool, and we were all complicit. The forum post ended with a warning. This information will probably be taken down soon. Download it while you can. I didn't download anything. I'm not that stupid. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. If this was true, it wasn't just clever, it was genius. The CIA had found a way to turn people into unpaid data collectors, and they made billions doing it. And the worst part? No one questioned it. It was just a game. That night, I couldn't sleep. It wasn't because I was scared or anything dramatic like that. It was just unsettling. I started thinking about all the times I'd played Pokémon GO, walking around with my camera open, catching stupid digital monsters without a second thought. How much of my data had they collected? How much had they collected from everyone else? I tried to shake it off, but it stuck with me. And the more I thought about it, the more questions I had. Was this just a one-time thing? Or were there other games, other apps, doing the same thing? How much of our lives were being monitored without us even realizing it? I didn't go back to the forum. I didn't download any more files, but I knew this wasn't something I could just forget about. And honestly, I don't think I'll ever look at my phone the same way again. The days after I found that forum post were a blur. It was like someone had planted a seed in my head, and it wouldn't stop growing. I kept thinking about how Pokémon GO had changed the way people interacted with the world. It wasn't just a game, it was a movement. People were outside more, exploring their cities and even forming communities around it. But now, with this new perspective, it felt like all of that was just part of some elaborate ruse. Still, I couldn't convince myself to go back to the forum. Something about that place felt too dangerous. Not in the sense that anyone was after me or anything. I never shared my real name or even created an account, but it was the knowledge itself. There's something unsettling about knowing things you're not supposed to know. It's like standing on the edge of a cliff. And even though you're safe, you can't shake the thought of how easy it would be to fall. But my curiosity got the better of me in a different way. I started researching, nothing too deep, just normal Google searches and Reddit threads. I wanted to see if anyone else was talking about this. At first, all I found were the usual conspiracy theories. Most of them were laughable, like claiming that Niantic, the company behind Pokémon GO, was run by aliens, or that the game was secretly trying to brainwash kids. But the more I looked, the more I started finding things that lined up with what I'd read on the forum. For example, did you know that Niantic's founder, John Hanke, used to work for a company that got funding from In-Q-Tel? That's the CIA's venture capital arm. It's not exactly a secret, but it's not something they advertise either. And then there was the fact that Niantic's first project, before Pokémon GO, was an app called Field Trip. It used GPS to give users information about landmarks and businesses as they walked around. Sound familiar? But what really got me was the Pokéstop locations. I found a Reddit thread from a few years ago where someone had compiled a list of all the weird places that had been turned into Pokéstops. Abandoned factories, obscure alleyways, even the middle of a desert. At the time, people thought it was just bad programming or random chance. But now, with everything I'd read, it felt deliberate, like they were mapping out areas that wouldn't normally show up on Google Maps. I also started thinking about all the times I'd seen news stories about Pokémon GO players ending up in strange or dangerous places. Like that time a group of kids wandered onto private property because they were chasing a rare Pokémon, or when someone found a dead body in a river while looking for a Pokéstop. At the time, it all seemed like coincidences, but now it felt like there was something bigger at play. Were those locations chosen for a reason? And if so, why? I wasn't finding any definitive answers, but the questions kept piling up. I even started wondering about other apps and games. Like, could this same concept be applied to something like Snapchat or TikTok? Both of them use GPS and cameras, and millions of people use them every day without a second thought. The idea made me uneasy, but it also felt too big to wrap my head around. At this point, I hadn't told anyone about what I'd found. Not because I was scared, but because I didn't know how to bring it up without sounding crazy. Hey, did you know Pokémon GO might be a secret CIA project? Yeah, that's not exactly dinner table conversation. And besides, what could I even do about it? It's not like I had any proof. The forum post and documents might as well have been a figment of my imagination. One night I was scrolling through Twitter when I saw a trending hashtag, #Pokémon GO Forever. Apparently Niantic had just announced a new update that would include more augmented reality features. Players could now use their phone cameras to scan their surroundings and earn rewards. They were even hosting contests where players could submit scans of unique locations for bonus prizes. I don't know why, but that announcement made everything feel real. Before, it was just a theory, something I could brush off if I wanted to. But now it felt like the pieces were falling into place. If the game really was a surveillance tool, then this update was the next step. They weren't just collecting GPS data and camera footage anymore. They were actively encouraging players to upload detailed scans of the world around them. And the craziest part? People were excited about it. That night I went back to the forum. I didn't want to, but I felt like I had to. When I logged in, the post about Pokémon GO was still there, but the comments section had been locked. That wasn't unusual. Most of the older posts on the forum were locked to prevent spam or trolling. But there was a new thread that caught my attention. Niantic's AR update, what they're really after. The thread didn't have as much detail as the original post, but it expanded on the idea of the game being used for surveillance. According to the author, the new AR feature was designed to create 3D maps of locations that couldn't be accessed through traditional means. They claimed that the data would be used for everything from urban planning to military operations. Again, it sounded crazy, but at this point, I wasn't so sure anymore. The thread ended with a link to another .onion site. I didn't click on it. I wasn't about to push my luck. But it was clear that this was bigger than just Pokémon GO. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about one game or one company. It was about how much of our lives we're willing to share without even realizing it. That night, I deleted Pokémon GO from my phone. Not because I thought it would make a difference, but because I couldn't look at the app the same way anymore. Every time I opened it, I felt like I was being watched, not by a person, but by a system I couldn't even begin to understand. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't help but wonder, if this is what they're doing with a game, what else are they capable of? But like it or not, it was not illegal what they were doing after all. We probably accepted all of that with the terms and conditions we never read. After deleting Pokémon GO, I thought I'd feel some relief, like I'd taken control of the situation, even in a small way. But if anything, it made things worse. Now the questions I had felt even bigger, and there were no easy answers. Every time I looked at my phone, I couldn't help but wonder how much of my data had already been collected and what it was being used for. And it wasn't just my phone, it was everything. Apps, websites, even the smart TV in my living room. It was like the more I thought about it, the more connected everything seemed. I decided to take a break from the whole thing. No more research, no more forums, no more late nights obsessing over something I couldn't change. I tried to go back to my normal routine, work, hanging out with friends, scrolling through Instagram, but it was like I couldn't unsee what I'd read. Every time I saw someone post a video from their phone or share their location, I'd catch myself wondering, who else is watching this? A few days later, I was at a Starbucks, sipping on my coffee and half-heartedly scrolling through my phone. I wasn't really looking for anything, just killing time. That's when I saw a post in one of the tech subreddits I follow. The title was simple: "How much does Google know about you?" The post wasn't anything groundbreaking. It was mostly a guide on how to check your Google account's activity history. But as I read through the comments, one of them jumped out at me. It was a link to a video titled "Surveillance Capitalism and the Age of AR." I didn't recognize the uploader, but the thumbnail showed a map covered in glowing pins with the caption, "The future is watching." I hesitated for a moment before clicking. The video started with a montage of people using their phones, taking selfies, recording videos, playing games. The narrator's voice was calm and matter-of-fact, almost like a documentary. They talked about how augmented reality was changing the way we interact with the world, blending the digital and physical in ways that felt seamless. But then they shifted gears. While AR technology promises convenience and entertainment, the narrator said, it also opens the door to unprecedented levels of surveillance. Every time you use an AR app, you're not just interacting with the digital world, you're contributing to it. The video went on to explain how AR apps collect data, not just your location, but detailed scans of your surroundings. It showed examples of companies using this data for things like marketing, urban planning, and even law enforcement. One clip showed a police department using AR data to recreate a crime scene. Another showed a real estate company creating virtual tours of neighborhoods based on player data from a Pokémon GO style game. At first, it all seemed innocent enough. But then the video started talking about how this data could be misused. The narrator brought up examples of companies selling user data without consent, or governments using AR apps to monitor citizens. One of the most unsettling parts was when they showed a map of AR hotspots around the world. It was covered in glowing dots, each one representing a location where players had used their cameras to scan their surroundings. The narrator pointed out how these hotspots often coincided with places of interest: government buildings, private properties, even military installations. It reminded me of what I'd read on the forum, but seeing it laid out like this made it feel more real. The video wasn't just talking about Pokémon GO, it was talking about a much larger system. A system where games, apps, and even social media platforms were all interconnected, collecting data and feeding it into a network that most people didn't even know existed. By the time the video ended, I felt like I was back at square one. Deleting Pokémon GO had been a small gesture, but it was clear that the problem went far beyond a single app. If what the video said was true, then this wasn't just about games or AR. It was about how much of our lives we're willing to trade for convenience and entertainment. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about that video. I kept replaying certain parts in my head, like the map of AR hotspots or the clips of companies using player data. It wasn't just the idea of being watched that bothered me. It was the fact that it was so subtle, so easy to overlook. No one forces you to use these apps. You do it because you want to, because it's fun, or convenient, or just part of modern life. And in doing so, you give up a little bit of yourself without even realizing it. One night, I decided to do a little experiment. I opened my phone and went through all my apps, checking the permissions for each one. It was eye-opening, to say the least. Even apps I rarely used had access to my location, my camera, and my microphone. Some of them even had permissions I couldn't explain, like access to my phone's storage or Bluetooth. I started revoking permissions left and right, but it felt like a drop in the bucket. The more I tried to control my data, the more I realized how much of it I'd already given away. By the time I was done, I felt drained. Not scared, not paranoid, just tired. It was like trying to hold back a flood with a sandbag. No matter how careful you are, there's always something slipping through the cracks. That night as I lay in bed, I thought about the video and the forum post. I thought about how much of our world is connected, how much of it we take for granted, and I wondered if there was any way to truly opt out, not just from Pokémon GO or AR apps, but from the system itself. The truth is, I don't think there is, and maybe that's the scariest part of all. A week went by, and I told myself I was done thinking about all this. I had already gone through my apps, tightened up permissions, and stopped using AR features altogether. That was enough, right? But deep down, I knew it wasn't. It felt like trying to clean up a spill while ignoring the fact that the faucet was still running. I decided to distract myself the best way I knew how, by getting out of the house. That weekend, a few friends and I made plans to hit up a local mall. It was one of those giant ones with everything. A food court that always smelled like buttery pretzels, a movie theater, and a Starbucks on every floor. The kind of place that felt alive with people moving around, laughing, and going about their day. It was the kind of normal I needed. As we were wandering around, one of my friends pulled out their phone and opened Pokémon GO. "I can't believe you still play that," I said, trying to sound casual. "What do you mean, it's fun?" they said, walking toward what I assumed was a Pokéstop. "They added a bunch of new stuff. You can scan things now for extra points." I tried not to react, but I could feel my stomach twist. I wanted to say something, to tell them about everything I'd read and seen. But how do you even begin to explain something like that without sounding like a conspiracy theorist? So I kept my mouth shut and watched as they walked around, phone in hand, completely unaware of what they might be contributing to. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Watching my friend play the game so casually had reminded me of how easy it is to ignore the bigger picture. Most people don't think about what happens to their data or how it's used. They just see a game, a fun distraction, and nothing more. I found myself back on YouTube, scrolling through videos about surveillance and data collection. One of them caught my eye. It was a talk from a tech conference about the future of augmented reality. The speaker was a well-known tech executive, the kind of person who shows up in headlines every time a new gadget drops. He talked about how AR was revolutionizing industries, from education to healthcare. But then he said something that stuck with me. AR isn't just a tool, he said. It's a platform. And like any platform, its value comes from the data it generates. He didn't say it in a sinister way. In fact, he seemed excited about it, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. But to me, it felt like confirmation of everything I'd been thinking. AR wasn't just about creating cool experiences or making games more immersive. It was about data. And data, as they say, is the new oil. After the talk, I went back to the forum. I hadn't been there since the last time I read that Pokémon GO post, but something told me I needed to check again. The thread about Niantic's AR update was still there, but this time there were new comments. Most of them were people speculating about what the update could mean, how the data might be used, who might be collecting it, and whether or not it was ethical. But one comment stood out. It wasn't long or detailed, just a single line. The data isn't for them. It's for what comes next. I didn't know what that meant, but it sent me down another rabbit hole. I started searching for anything I could find about the future of AR and data collection. Most of what I found was the usual tech jargon, smart glasses, immersive experiences, that sort of thing. But then I stumbled across an article about AI and how it's being trained using real-world data. The article explained how companies are using AR apps to gather data that helps improve AI algorithms, making them better at understanding the world around them. It made sense in a way. AR apps like Pokémon GO weren't just games. They were tools for mapping the world, creating a digital replica of reality that AI could learn from. But the more I thought about it, the more unsettling it felt. If the data was being used to train AI, what was the end goal? Was it just about making smarter apps and devices, or was there something bigger at play? I remembered the comment on the forum. It's for what comes next. What did that even mean? Was it about AI, surveillance, something else entirely? I didn't have any answers, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the tip of the iceberg. By the time I closed my laptop, it was almost midnight. I sat there in the dark, thinking about everything I'd read and watched. It felt like I was standing at the edge of a puzzle, with only a few scattered pieces to work with. I didn't know what the full picture looked like, but I knew it was bigger than I could imagine. And the scariest part? It wasn't some shadowy government agency or a secret cabal pulling the strings. It was us. Every person with a phone in their hand, willingly feeding the system without even realizing it. We were the puzzle pieces, and we didn't even know it. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to delete my social media or go off the grid. That felt impossible. But I was going to be more mindful about the apps I used, the data I shared, and the way I interacted with technology. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that ignorance isn't bliss. It's just another way to stay trapped. After that night, I tried to go back to normal. I wasn't obsessing over forums or binge-watching conspiracy videos anymore. But the thing is, once you start looking at the world a certain way, you can't unsee it. Every time I opened an app or walked past someone filming a TikTok, I'd think about the data being collected, the GPS locations, the scans of surroundings, the patterns of behavior. A few weeks later, I went to visit my cousin, who works as a software developer for a tech company. He's one of those people who's always ahead of the curve when it comes to gadgets and trends. We were sitting in his living room catching up when he mentioned something that made my ears perk up. "Did you see that new Niantic project?" he asked, scrolling through his phone. "They're working on some kind of AR glasses." "No, I haven't," I said, trying to sound casual. "What's it for?" He shrugged. "Same as Pokémon GO, I guess. Just more advanced. They're saying it'll let you see virtual stuff in the real world, like signs or characters walking around. It's supposed to feel seamless, like it's actually there." I didn't say anything, but my mind was racing. If AR apps were already collecting so much data, what could they do with glasses? They wouldn't just have access to your location or camera anymore. They'd be seeing the world through your eyes, in real time. It felt like the next logical step in everything I'd been reading about, and it made me wonder how much further it could go. "Do you think people care about privacy anymore?" I asked, trying to steer the conversation. He laughed. "Honestly, not really. People care about convenience. If the trade-off is giving up some data, they'll do it. Look at smart assistants, fitness trackers, even phones. Everyone knows they're being tracked, but no one stops using them." That stuck with me. He was right. Most people don't care, or at least not enough to change their behavior. And the companies know it. They make the trade-off feel small, like it's worth it for what you're getting in return. A free game, a cool gadget, a little extra convenience. On the drive home, I started thinking about everything I'd learned over the past few weeks. The forum post, the AR data, the comment about what comes next. It all felt connected, like pieces of a puzzle I was only beginning to understand. But there was one thing I couldn't figure out. Why? What was the end goal? Was it just about money? Or was there something bigger at play? That night I went back online, not to the forum, but to do my own research. I started looking into AR and AI again, focusing on what they were being used for. Most of what I found was harmless enough. Improvements to navigation apps, tools for education and training, stuff like that. But then I found an article that talked about digital twins. Apparently, it's a concept where you create a virtual copy of a real-world object, person, or even an entire city. Companies use them for simulations, planning, and testing. It sounded futuristic, but the article claimed it was already being done on a small scale. And that's when it hit me. What if all of this, the games, the apps, the AR data, wasn't just about surveillance? What if it was about building something bigger, a digital version of the world down to the tiniest detail? A world where everything and everyone could be tracked, simulated, and controlled. It sounds crazy, I know. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. If you had a digital twin of the real world, you wouldn't need cameras or spies. You'd already know everything, and if you controlled the digital world, you'd have influence over the real one too. I didn't sleep much that night, not because I was scared, but because I couldn't stop thinking about how far this could go. What if the next step wasn't just about glasses or apps? What if it was about creating a system so seamless, so integrated, that no one even noticed it was there? A system where we weren't just users, we were part of the network. The next morning I decided to make some changes. Nothing drastic. I wasn't about to throw my phone in a lake or anything, but small steps. I stopped using apps I didn't need, turned off location tracking whenever possible, and started being more mindful about what I shared online. It wasn't much, but it felt like a way to take back a little bit of control. I don't know if any of this will make a difference in the long run. Maybe the system is already too big to fight, or maybe it's just the price we pay for living in a connected world. But if there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's that awareness is the first step. You can't change what you don't understand. As for Pokémon GO, I haven't touched it since I deleted it. Sometimes when I see people walking around with their phones, I wonder if they know what they're contributing to. Probably not. But then again, maybe that's the point. After all, it's easier to build a puzzle when the pieces don't know they're part of something bigger. Let me preface this by saying I've never been one for conspiracy theories. Sure, I've chuckled at a few Reddit threads about the moon landing being faked or secret lizard overlords, but I always chalked it up to people having too much free time. What happened last week, though, flipped my world upside down. This isn't just another internet rabbit hole. It's something I wish I could unsee. I work in IT, specifically cybersecurity, which isn't nearly as cool as it sounds. Most of the time, I'm just resetting passwords for people who still think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is uncrackable. Occasionally, though, I dabble in ethical hacking, penetration testing for clients who want to make sure their systems are secure. That's where I picked up my familiarity with Tor, .onion sites, and the darker corners of the web. For the record, I stay away from the sketchy stuff. My curiosity doesn't extend to things like hitmen for hire or black market auctions. But sometimes when I'm working late, I'll poke around forums just to see what's out there. Last Tuesday was one of those nights. I had a late shift, followed by a backlog of tickets that kept me at my desk until 1 a.m. On a whim, I decided to open up my Tor browser and browse some forums, while sipping on the cold remnants of my Starbucks caramel macchiato. Nothing serious, just killing time. Most of what I found was the usual nonsense. Questionable Bitcoin deals, fake hacking services, and people ranting about government surveillance. Then I stumbled across a thread titled, "The Moon Base Files." The post didn't look like much at first, just a few grainy screenshots of what appeared to be NASA documents with some redacted text and official-looking stamps. The title caught my eye, though. "Leaked Classified Documents," it read. NASA and FBI joint operation. Secret base on the dark side of the moon. Hostile entity left behind. I laughed. I mean, come on. A moon base? It sounded like the plot of a bad science fiction movie, but something about the thread felt different. The user who posted it, dpayload, wasn't asking for Bitcoin or trying to sell the files. They had uploaded everything to a free, password-protected server, claiming they wanted the truth to come out. The post didn't have the usual flair of internet hoaxes. No grandiose language, no demands for attention. It was oddly subdued. Against my better judgment, I downloaded the files. I know. Rule number 1 of the dark web: never download random stuff. But my antivirus software is top-notch, and the curiosity, it was like a quiet itch I couldn't ignore. The folder was surprisingly small, just a handful of PDFs and one short video file. I scanned everything for malware, clean, and opened the first document. It was a briefing report dated 1973. The NASA letterhead looked authentic, and the writing was full of jargon about Lunar Operations Initiative and coordinated efforts with federal intelligence agencies. It described a secret project to build a research station on the far side of the moon, out of sight from Earth. The base, referred to as Station Umbra, was apparently constructed in collaboration with the FBI and some private aerospace contractors. The goal? To conduct experiments away from public scrutiny. The documents didn't specify what kind of experiments, but there were mentions of anomalous lunar activity and unidentified radio signals. One section described finding an unusual subterranean formation during the Apollo 15 mission, which led to the immediate approval of the moon base project. Apparently, whatever they found was important enough to justify spending billions in taxpayer dollars. Off the books, of course. I was intrigued but skeptical. This could have easily been some talented Photoshop work. But then I opened the second file, a transcript of a recorded conversation between two astronauts on a classified Apollo mission. The names were redacted, but the dialogue was unnerving. Astronaut 1. Do you see that? About 20 degrees west of the crater. Astronaut 2. Yeah. What the hell is it? Astronaut 1. Base camp, we've got something. Hold on, it's moving. The transcript ended abruptly, followed by a note. Communication lost for 12 minutes. Recovery of crew incomplete. That's when I decided to watch the video file. It was a grainy, black and white clip, less than 2 minutes long. The camera appeared to be mounted on the exterior of a spacecraft, panning slowly over the lunar surface. At first, it looked like nothing more than rocks and craters. Then, in the distance, something shiny came into view. A structure, unmistakably artificial. It wasn't just a tent or a flagpole. It was a full-blown building, complete with a domed roof and what looked like solar panels. The camera zoomed in, and I swear I saw movement. Something small and quick darting across the screen like a shadow. The video cut to static before I could make out any more details. I sat there staring at my laptop screen, unsure of what to think. Was this some elaborate ARG? A viral marketing campaign for an upcoming movie? If it was eerily convincing. I spent the next hour combing through the rest of the files. There were blueprints of the base, personnel rosters, and even maintenance logs. One entry caught my eye. It was dated 1987 and mentioned a containment breach. The details were sparse, but the log noted that all remaining personnel were evacuated, and that the entity remains non-hostile as long as proximity is avoided. Entity? Non-hostile? What the hell were they talking about? At that point, I had more questions than answers. Why was the project abandoned? What exactly did they find on the moon? And most importantly, why was this information being leaked now? The dark web isn't exactly the place you go to for altruistic whistleblowing. I decided to shut everything down for the night. It was almost 3 a.m., and I had work the next morning. As much as I wanted to dive deeper, I knew I'd be useless if I didn't get some sleep. Before closing my laptop, though, I made a copy of the files and uploaded them to a private cloud server, just in case. As I crawled into bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd stumbled onto something I wasn't supposed to see. But what could I do? Call the police? Email NASA? Hey, I think I found your moon base plans on the dark web. Yeah, that wasn't happening. For now, all I could do was try to piece the story together on my own. Little did I know, this was just the beginning. The next morning, I woke up with a gnawing sense of unfinished business. The files I'd stumbled upon the night before felt too big to ignore, but I wasn't sure how to process them. I mean, if even half of it was true, it would be the biggest cover-up in modern history. A secret moon base hidden from the public for decades, abandoned due to some entity they found. It sounded insane on the surface, but those documents felt Real. Too real. I went about my day as usual, logged into work, resolved some tickets, grabbed lunch at the nearby Burger King. For the most part, it was a regular Wednesday. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't stop thinking about the files. By the time my shift ended, I had made up my mind to dig deeper. The first thing I did was revisit the forum where I'd found the original thread. I wanted to see if anyone else had commented or verified the authenticity of the documents. To my surprise, the thread was gone, completely wiped as if it had never existed. That wasn't unusual for the dark web. Threads get deleted all the time, either by moderators or the original posters. But something about the disappearance felt abrupt. Deep Payload, the user who had uploaded the files, had also deleted their account. It was like they had dropped the information and vanished. Luckily, I had the files saved. This time I decided to approach the investigation more methodically. I started by cross-referencing some of the names in the personnel rosters against publicly available information. Most of the names were redacted, but a few initials and positions were left visible. For example, one of the logs mentioned a doctor. HM, lead researcher. A quick search led me to a retired NASA scientist, Dr. Harold Miles, who had worked on lunar research projects in the late 1960s and early 1970s. His LinkedIn profile confirmed that he had abruptly left NASA in 1973, the same year the moon base was supposedly established. I also found a reference to a private aerospace company called Lunaris Dynamics, listed as a contractor for the project. Unlike NASA, this company barely had an online presence. Their website was a single outdated page with a generic Contact Us form. Digging through archived web pages on the Wayback Machine, I found that Lunaris Dynamics had been active until the late 1980s before mysteriously shutting down. No explanation, no public announcements, just gone. The deeper I went, the more it felt like pulling at a thread that could unravel something enormous. But what really caught my attention was one of the PDFs I hadn't fully read the night before. It was titled Operational Anomalies and Incident Reports, and detailed several strange occurrences during the moon base's operation. Most of the entries were mundane: equipment malfunctions, power outages, minor injuries. But then there was incident number 27, which stood out like a sore thumb. According to the report, incident number 27 occurred on February 15, 1984, during a routine maintenance operation. The entry was heavily redacted, but here's what I could make out. Incident number 27. At approximately 14:32 UTC, redacted reported an unidentified noise originating from sublevel 3. The noise resembled redacted, described as mechanical yet organic. Upon investigation, redacted discovered that Containment Unit 3B had been compromised. Security personnel were dispatched to redacted. Outcome: all personnel were evacuated within 6 hours. No casualties reported. Containment protocols updated. Base declared unsafe for continued operations. The last line hit me the hardest. Base declared unsafe for continued operations. Whatever happened during incident number 27, it was serious enough to shut down the entire project. But what stuck with me even more was the phrase, mechanical yet organic. I didn't even know what that could mean. A machine? An animal? Something in between? The lack of details made it all the more unsettling. I decided to share what I had found with a trusted friend of mine, Alex. He's an amateur astronomer and one of the few people I know who shares my curiosity about space. I sent him an encrypted email with a few excerpts from the files, careful not to send the entire package just yet. I wanted to see his reaction first. Later that evening, Alex called me, his voice unusually serious. "Where did you get this?" he asked. I hesitated. "I found it on a forum." "Why?" "Because if this is fake, it's the most convincing fake I've ever seen. The coordinates listed for Station Umbra? They line up with a region on the far side of the moon called Daedalus Crater. It's completely hidden from Earth's view, and it's not a place anyone would normally pay attention to. But here's the thing. There are reports of strange radio signals coming from that area dating back to the Apollo missions. Strange how? I asked. Unexplained interference, bursts of static, things like that. NASA dismissed it as cosmic radiation or equipment glitches, but some amateur radio enthusiasts have claimed the signals contain patterns, like someone, or something, is trying to communicate. I didn't know what to say. Alex wasn't the type to jump to conclusions, and if he thought there was something to this, it only added to the growing weight of the evidence. Before we hung up, Alex said something that stuck with me. If this is real, you're holding on to something people have been trying to prove for decades. Just be careful with it. I wasn't sure what careful meant in this situation. I wasn't planning on going public with the files or contacting the authorities. For now, I just wanted to understand the truth. But the more I uncovered, the more it felt like this was bigger than I had imagined. What started as a late-night curiosity was quickly turning into something much darker, and I hadn't even scratched the surface yet. After my conversation with Alex, I realized two things. First, I wasn't just chasing a dead-end conspiracy theory. There was something substantial here. Second, I had to be extremely careful. While I wasn't paranoid about anyone watching me, I knew better than to start throwing this kind of information around recklessly. The internet never forgets, and even small breadcrumbs can snowball into attention I didn't want. The next step was digging into those strange radio signals Alex had mentioned. If there was any proof of something out there, it would likely tie back to those reports. I started by searching through amateur radio forums and astronomy subreddits, looking for discussions about anomalies coming from the far side of the moon. At first, most of what I found was noise, people speculating about alien signals, sharing blurry telescope images, or debating whether the moon landing was fake. But then I found something that caught my eye. A user on a small astronomy forum had posted a thread titled "Daedalus Crater Interference." The post was dated from 3 years ago and included a recording of a faint, repetitive signal that they had picked up using a homemade radio telescope. The user described the signal as a series of clicks and hums that seemed to repeat at irregular intervals. What made it stand out was that it didn't match any known natural phenomena, like pulsars or space debris. Curious, I downloaded the audio file they had shared and ran it through some basic spectrogram software. I'm no sound engineer, but even I could tell that the pattern wasn't random. There was structure to it, like a kind of Morse code, though it didn't translate to anything recognizable. It gave me chills, not because it was scary, but because it felt intentional. Someone, or something, had sent this signal. The forum thread didn't go far. Most of the replies dismissed the post as fake or claimed it was just interference from Earth-based equipment. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was connected to what I had found in the moon base files. The timing, the location, it all lined up too perfectly to be a coincidence. I decided to reach out to the user who had posted the thread. Their profile showed they hadn't been active in over a year, but I sent them a message anyway, asking if they had any more recordings or information about the signal. To my surprise, they responded within a few hours. Their reply was short and cryptic. The signal stopped a year ago. Don't know why. Too many people started asking questions. Be careful. That was all they wrote. No follow-up, no explanation. It left me with more questions than answers, but it also confirmed something important. The signal had been active for years before suddenly going silent, and judging by their tone, it wasn't because of natural causes. At this point, I felt like I was walking a fine line between uncovering a massive secret and stepping into territory I wasn't prepared for. I wasn't scared. Nothing about this felt dangerous or threatening, but I knew I was in over my head. So I decided to take a step back and focus on what I could verify. One of the documents from the Moonbase files mentioned something called Project Aegis, which appeared to be a joint effort between NASA and the FBI. The description was vague, but it referred to establishing protocols for containing non-terrestrial anomalies. That phrase stuck with me. Non-terrestrial anomalies. It was the closest the files came to acknowledging the existence of extraterrestrial life, though it stopped short of saying it outright. I started researching Project Aegis, but unsurprisingly, there wasn't much to find. The name popped up in a few obscure government reports from the 1970s, but they were all heavily redacted. The most interesting connection came from a whistleblower interview I found buried on YouTube. The video was grainy, with a middle-aged man sitting in a dimly lit room, his face obscured. He claimed to be a former contractor for NASA, and while most of his story sounded like typical conspiracy fodder, one detail caught my attention. Project Aegis wasn't about protecting us from aliens, he said. It was about protecting them from us. That line hit me like a brick. What did he mean by protecting them from us? Was he suggesting that whatever NASA found on the moon wasn't hostile, but needed to be shielded from human interference? It was a chilling thought, not because it implied aliens existed, but because it painted humanity as the potential aggressor. I spent the next few days piecing together what I could. The files, the radio signals, the whistleblower's testimony, it all painted a picture that was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. The Moonbase files weren't just about a secret base or a government cover-up. They hinted at something far bigger, something that humanity might not be ready to understand. But even as I uncovered more pieces of the puzzle, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something crucial. The files mentioned an entity left behind on the moon, yet none of the documents described what it was or why it was there. Was it a life form, a machine, something else entirely? The lack of answers was maddening, but it also kept me hooked. That weekend, I decided to take a break from the dark web and focus on the physical world for a bit. I met up with Alex at a local Domino's Pizza, our usual hangout spot, and filled him in on everything I had learned since our last conversation. As always, he was skeptical but intrigued. "You realize this could all be an elaborate hoax, right?" he said, biting into a slice of pepperoni pizza. Some bored hacker with too much time on their hands. "Maybe," I admitted, "but if it's fake, it's the most convincing fake I've ever seen. And if it's real..." Alex nodded, finishing my thought. "If it's real, then we've just uncovered one of the biggest secrets in history." We sat in silence for a moment, letting the weight of that statement sink in. For the first time since I'd found the files, I felt a twinge of doubt. Not about their authenticity, but about what I was getting myself into. What started as a late-night curiosity had spiraled into something I couldn't ignore, and while I wasn't afraid of being chased or watched, I couldn't help but wonder, how deep did this rabbit hole go? By the following week, the Moonbase files had completely taken over my free time. Every spare moment I had was spent researching, cross-referencing, and trying to connect the dots. My life outside of this hadn't changed much. I was still showing up to work, grabbing coffee at Starbucks, and occasionally catching up on Netflix shows. But mentally, I was consumed by what I had found. I had started to notice something interesting, or rather frustrating. No matter how much I searched online, it seemed like no one else was talking about this. The files had disappeared from the dark web entirely. Even the most obscure forums and subreddits turned up nothing. It was like the Moonbase files had never existed. If I didn't have my own copy saved, I might have thought I'd imagined the whole thing. But there was one thing I hadn't tried yet: reaching out to someone who might actually have first-hand knowledge. It sounded crazy, even to me, but I figured it was worth a shot. I remembered seeing Dr. Harold Miles's LinkedIn profile during my initial search, the former NASA scientist whose name matched the redacted initials in the personnel logs. His profile wasn't exactly active, but it had an email address listed for consulting inquiries. It took me a couple of hours to draft an email that didn't sound completely unhinged. I kept it vague, mentioning that I was doing independent research on early NASA projects and had come across his name. I didn't mention the moonbase files or anything about entities. Instead, I focused on his work in lunar research and asked if he'd be willing to answer a few questions. I didn't expect a response. In fact, I was almost relieved when I hit send, assuming that would be the end of it. To my surprise, he replied within 2 days. The email was short but polite. He thanked me for reaching out and said he'd be happy to answer my questions, but only over the phone. That threw me off a bit. Why the phone? Was he worried about something being in writing? Or was it just an old-school preference? Either way, I wasn't about to pass up the opportunity. We scheduled a call for the following evening. When the time came, I was nervous, like I was about to interview someone for a job. I had my questions written out in a notebook, my laptop open with the files pulled up just in case. When the phone rang, I took a deep breath and answered. "Hello?" I said. "Mr. Wright, I presume?" His voice was warm and slightly gravelly, the kind of voice you'd expect from someone who'd spent years lecturing in college classrooms. "It's Dr. Miles. I understand you have some questions about my time at NASA?" "Yes, thank you for taking the time to speak with me," I said, trying to sound professional. "I'm particularly interested in the lunar research projects you were involved in during the early 1970s. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "That was a long time ago," he said finally, "but I'll do my best to answer. What exactly are you looking to know?" I decided to start broad, asking about the Apollo missions and their objectives. He spoke candidly about his work, describing the challenges of gathering data from the moon's surface and the excitement of being part of such a groundbreaking era. But when I steered the conversation toward the far side of the moon, specifically the Daedalus crater, his tone shifted. "That's an unusual area," he said carefully. "Not many people know much about it." "Why is that?" I asked. "Well, for one thing, it's difficult to study. The far side of the moon is always facing away from Earth, so direct observation is nearly impossible without satellites or manned missions. And then there's the interference." "What kind of interference?" I pressed. "Unexplained static," he said. "We first noticed it during the Apollo 15 mission. It was faint at first, but the closer we got to the Daedalus crater, the stronger it became. At the time, we chalked it up to equipment malfunction, but later, well, let's just say not everyone was convinced." I hesitated, unsure how far to push. "Was that why Station Umbra was built?" There was another pause, longer this time. "Where did you hear that name?" he asked quietly. I froze. I hadn't planned on revealing my source, but there was no way to dodge the question now. "I came across some documents," I admitted. "They mentioned a research station on the far side of the moon. I was hoping you could tell me more about it." For a moment I thought he was going to hang up, but then he sighed. "Station Umbra was real," he said, "but you won't find it in any official records. It was one of the most classified projects I ever worked on." "What was its purpose?" I asked. "To study an anomaly," he said. "Something we found beneath the surface of the Daedalus crater. I can't tell you much more than that. Not because I don't want to, but because I don't have all the answers myself." The project was compartmentalized. Only a handful of us knew the full scope of what we were dealing with. "What happened to the station?" I asked. "It was abandoned in the mid-1980s, he said. Officially, they cited funding issues. Unofficially, there were incidents." "Incidents," I repeated. "Let's just say there were things we didn't fully understand," he said. "And when you don't understand something, it's best to leave it alone." There was a heaviness in his voice that made me believe him. Whatever they had found up there, it wasn't something you could explain away with science or logic. It was something unknown, and perhaps unknowable. Before we ended the call, he gave me one last piece of advice. "Be careful where you dig," he said. "Some secrets are buried for a reason." When I hung up, I felt like I had more questions than answers. But one thing was clear. Station Umbra wasn't just a myth. It was real, and whatever they had found on the far side of the moon was still up there, waiting to be discovered. The conversation with Dr. Miles lingered in my mind for days. His cryptic warning, "Be careful where you dig," was unsettling, but it wasn't enough to stop me. If anything, it pushed me to dig deeper. I wasn't planning to blow the whistle or upload the files for the world to see. I just wanted to understand the truth for myself. One file I had barely glanced at caught my attention as I reviewed the documents again. It was labeled Umbra Phase 4, Unclassified Memorandum, and seemed out of place among the heavily redacted reports. This document was far less technical, almost as if it had been written for an internal PR briefing. It outlined some of the successes of Station Umbra, like advancements in material science and energy research. But one sentence at the end stood out. Phase 4 operations ceased following confirmation of anomalous biological matter within the Daedalus subterranean zone. That phrase, anomalous biological matter, was unlike anything else in the files. Up until that point, most references to what they had found on the moon were vague and technical, using phrases like non-terrestrial phenomena or unusual geologic structures. This was the first time the word biological appeared, and it sent a chill through me. What could it mean? Life? Something alive? Or something that had been alive? With that lead in mind, I decided to revisit the video file I had downloaded earlier. The grainy black and white footage of the moon's surface had haunted me since I first watched it, particularly the brief moment where something darted across the screen near the station. This time, I slowed the playback speed and enhanced the brightness as much as I could using free video editing software. What I found didn't give me answers, it gave me more questions. In the slowed footage, I could make out a faint, almost imperceptible shape near the station. It wasn't humanoid or even animal-like. It was more of a ripple, a distortion in the air, like heat waves rising from asphalt on a summer day. It moved quickly, zigzagging across the screen before disappearing into the shadows. Whatever it was, it didn't look like it belonged on the moon, or anywhere else for that matter. I sent the enhanced video to Alex and asked for his thoughts. He called me within minutes. "Okay, that's not normal," he said. "I don't even know what I'm looking at. It's like it's there and not there at the same time." "Do you think it's some kind of camera glitch?" I asked, though I already knew what his answer would be. "Maybe, but I doubt it," he said. "The movement is too deliberate. It almost looks reactive, like it's aware of the camera." That word, aware, sent a shiver down my spine. If the shape in the video was alive, even in some abstract sense, it raised a terrifying possibility. NASA and the FBI hadn't just found something strange on the moon. They had found something sentient. At this point, I knew I had reached the limits of what I could uncover on my own. I wasn't a scientist or a journalist, just a guy with a laptop and too much curiosity. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled onto something huge, something that deserved to be known. Still, I wasn't reckless. If the files ever got out, it wouldn't be because of me. I had no intention of making myself the center of a conspiracy. Instead, I focused on documenting everything I had found in a private journal, organizing the files and my notes in case someone, someday, wanted to dig deeper. I also took Dr. Miles's warning seriously and made sure the files were stored securely, with multiple backups in encrypted drives. Call it paranoia, but I didn't want this information disappearing without a trace, like the original thread on the dark web. In the days that followed, I tried to move on. I went back to work, hung out with Alex, and even treated myself to a relaxing weekend road trip to clear my head. The drive was uneventful, and for a while I almost managed to forget about the moon base files. But late at night, when the world was quiet and I was left alone with my thoughts, the questions came flooding back. What did NASA and the FBI leave behind on the moon? Was it still there, lying dormant in the shadows of the Daedalus crater? And if so, why did they abandon it instead of trying to destroy it? Or worse, bring it back to Earth? The idea that something unknown, something alive was still out there was both fascinating and terrifying. But here's the thing. As much as I wanted answers, I wasn't sure I wanted to be the one to find them. There's a reason some secrets stay buried, whether it's beneath layers of government red tape or miles of lunar rock. Sometimes the truth isn't something we're ready to handle. In the end, I decided to leave the files where they were, safe, encrypted, and far from prying eyes. If anyone else ever stumbled across them, they'd have to decide for themselves what to do with the information. As for me, I had learned enough to know when to stop digging. After all, not every mystery needs to be solved. Sometimes it's enough to know that the unknown is out there, waiting.